Chapter 2, The Islamic World. Let's start with some discussion about Islam. Muslims believe that Muhammad was chosen by God to serve as God's messenger or prophet to humanity. In 610, Muhammad received the Word of God, the Quran, as a series of poetic recitations from the Archangel Gabriel. The Quran is 114 chapters and 6,000 verses. It was written down after Muhammad's death in 632. In 622, he was forced to leave Mecca and travel north to Medina. There are 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. Number 1, affirmation of faith. There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. 2, prayer 5 times daily, typically at dawn, midday, afternoon, sunset, and before bed. 3, fasting. No food or drink during daylight during Ramadan, which is the 9th lunar month of the Muslim year. 4, pilgrimage, Hajj, journey to Mecca. 5, charity or tithing. In the Islamic world, there was a protected status for other people of the book, such as Jews and Christians. Like all of the 3 major monotheistic religions, they all struggled with how to depict religious figures. Do you depict them as human? Can you depict them as human? Is this problematic? They all have these issues, and they all come to different conclusions. In the Islamic faith, they come to the conclusion that you cannot depict Muhammad or some of the other religious figures. In the Christian faith, they do decide to actually depict these figures. Some of the themes we're going to see in Islamic art are reverence for the word. We're going to see the importance of the Quran and the Kufic alphabet. We're going to see the alphabet itself used as a decorative element as well as the words themselves. Second is artistic expression without the human figure. Instead, we're going to see a lot of geometric, floral, vegetal imagery. The third theme is the equality of the genres. That means that painting is not the top way of expression within the Western tradition. We're going to see that ceramics and metalworking and weaving and carving and sculpture and all of those types of art are going to be equally important. Here is a map of the Islamic world that we'll be discussing in this chapter. You will notice we'll also be going over to Spain and talking about art over there as well. So you can see how Islam spreads in this map. So it centers in the Middle Eastern region, and then it spreads in the 1850s all the way to Northern Africa, Spain, into Central Europe, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. Now, let's talk about the Kaaba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. This is during Hajj, and you can see the massive number of people there. The Kaaba is a large cubic shrine draped in black cloth, and it contains a black stone that the Archangel Gabriel gave to Ishmael. Muslims believe that Abraham, known as Ibrahim in the Islamic tradition, and his son Ishmael constructed the Kaaba. The black stone is believed to have been given to Ibrahim by the angel Gabriel and is revered by Muslims. The Kaaba is the point of orientation for Muslims when they pray. It is also the focal point of the pilgrimage or the Hajj. During the pre-Islamic times, the Kaaba served as a shrine and sacred space. Arab tribes and others made annual pilgrimages to the site and visited it to honor tribal and ancestral deities that included several gods and goddesses. In 620, Muhammad was driven out of Mecca to Yathrib, which is now known as Medina. In 629, Muhammad returned to Mecca and was able to enter the town and purge the Kaaba of its idols, restoring it to its original role as a symbol of a monotheistic faith and affirming its place as the site of the Hajj. The 4 corners of the Kaaba are aligned with the 4 points of the compass. On one of the corners, set in a silver bezel, is the black stone, which is believed to be of miraculous and ancient origin. It was thought to have fallen from heaven as a guide for Adam and Eve to build an altar. During the civil war between Caliph Abd al-Malik and Ibn Zabar, who controlled Mecca, the Kaaba was set on fire in 683. Reportedly, the black stone broke into 3 pieces, and Ibn Zabar reassembled it with silver. He built the Kaaba in wood and stone, following Ibrahim's original dimensions, and paved the space around the Kaaba. The Kaaba is generally covered with a black silk covering embroidered with Quranic verses. This is called a kiswa, which is replaced annually, a practice that originated during medieval Muslim history. It has one entrance and the interior is empty, but it is customarily cleaned and swept in a ritual that precedes the Hajj. Upon arriving in Mecca, the pilgrims gather in the courtyard of the Hajj al-Haram around the Kaaba. They then circumambulate or walk around the Kaaba, during which they hope to kiss and touch the black stone embedded in the eastern corner of the Kaaba. Here's another image of the Kaaba, and you can see this is during Hajj and the large number of people surrounding it. This image is from 2020 during the pandemic, so there was much fewer number of people there. Another image during the pandemic, something that no one had really seen for a long time, is just that few people around the Kaaba. The Dome of the Rock. Now we're in Jerusalem. This is the Temple Mount where Abraham almost sacrificed his son. In the Christian tradition, we believe it is Isaac he almost sacrificed. In the Islamic tradition, it is Ishmael. This is also the place where Muhammad was taken by Gabriel on a spiritual journey to experience heaven and hell. This was constructed in 690 under Caliph Abd al-Malik, and this is considered to be the earliest mosque. There are 2 ambulatories around a central rock. This is the interior. This is the exterior, and you can see the large number of people there. Now you can see the decoration on the outside. If you look closely, you can see lots of geometric and vegetal patterning. You can also see on that top level around the building that is Kufic script. These are verses from the Quran. There are 240 meters worth of inscriptions. Because it is a religious building, there are no images of people in the entire building. There's a close-up. You can see the Kufic script better. There is the rock itself, and this is the area underneath the rock. And according to local custom, women go underneath the rock because it will give them the ability to conceive. It is meant to increase fertility. The Great Mosque of Damascus, also called the Umayyad Mosque. This is the earliest surviving stone mosque, built between 705 and 715 by the Umayyad Caliph al-Walid I. There was a church previously on this property. He bought this church, demolished it, and left a few of the walls, and then created the mosque around this. Interestingly enough, the church wasn't even the first religious building on this site. The original religious building on the site was an Ammonite temple to the Syrian god Hadad. Then there was a 1st century Roman temple to the god Jupiter. Then the Christian church to St. John the Baptist. And then it was converted to the Islamic mosque that we see today. So this has been a revered site for quite a while. If you look very closely, you can see some of the fragments in the structure that date to the Syro-Roman times, as well as some elements that date to the time it was a church. So let's go inside and look at these wonderful mosaics. You can see the detail work very much focused on the architecture in this one. Here we've got some architecture as well as some trees. Here's some more of the mosaics there in the interior of the Great Mosque. Palace at Mashhad in Jordan. The Mashhad was renowned as one of the largest and most impressive of all the Umayyad palaces. It was built by Caliph al-Walid II in 744 in the Jordanian desert. It was decorated with wall paintings, stucco reliefs. Some of the walls are 470 feet on each side. Unfortunately, it was abandoned before it was fully completed. It's believed that the war with the Abbasid tribes and the tragic death of Walid II in 744 contributed to this abandonment. He was killed by angry workers on the construction site of his palace. Here you can see them with the person there to give you an idea of the scale. These are just fragments of some of the walls. Here's some details. So we see lots of animals, more details. Some of these figures are Persian as well as Coptic Egyptian. The Great Mosque of Cordoba. We're now in Spain here. This is part of the Umayyad time. Originally, this was a temple to the Roman god Janus. The temple was converted into a church by the Visigoths, who seized Cordoba in 572. Then the church was converted into a mosque, then completely rebuilt by the Umayyads. These are called horseshoe arcades. Arcades with alternating red and white voussoirs. One set of arches is superimposed above the other. Here we see an extended image of this. This is a dome in front of the mihrab in the Great Mosque. So the mihrab is what you look towards while you are in the mosque, so you know you are pointed towards Mecca. You can see the intense detail work. The Qibla wall. The Qibla is the entire wall that is pointed towards Mecca. And now you can see elements of the church still exist that have been integrated into the mosque itself. And you can see the courtyard of the mosque. Courtyard's a very important element. That's where you would have fountains originally in which to wash your feet and hands to become clean, to be in this sacred space. Palace of the Lions, Alhambra in Granada. Again, we're still in Spain. The Alhambra, or the Red Palace, there are series of buildings, pavilions, courtyards. They were all built around the idea of the metaphor paradise on earth. We have inscriptions on these walls in that Kufic script. In this case, they are not Quranic verses. They are poetic verses dealing with paradise. Some of the great Arab poets of the time provided these verses. It was later taken over to be a Renaissance palace and later still a Franciscan monastery. So if you visit the Alhambra today, you will see elements of all of its past versions. The entire palace is over a half a mile. The original palace there before the Islamic version that we're seeing right now was actually Jewish. This was in the 12th century. In this Court of the Lions, you will see the fountain surrounded by the 12 marble lions that are lifting this up. Then you see the 4 water channels emerging from this fountain. These are referring to the 4 rivers of paradise, and they're bringing water into other courtyards. There's a close-up image of the fountain. There is the entire structure, so you can see there are different elements. You can see parts that are going to be very much like the Renaissance as well as the older parts, but it is a massive structure. And there's some more detail to show you some of the Kufic script going around the openings and going up. You can see again these are bits of poetry as well as the beautiful tile work and inscriptions. Now let's go into the Abbasid Caliphate. This is the Great Mosque of Samarra. It was 800 by 512 feet, covering 10 acres. The walls were 8 foot thick, 33 feet high. 464 mud brick piers supported a teak roof. The spiral minaret was 160 feet high. It was also nicknamed the Snail Shell Minaret. This tower was the main focal point of the mosque and covered 42 acres at its peak. For a time, the Great Mosque of Samarra was the largest mosque in the world. The mosque itself was destroyed in 1278 after Hulagu Khan's invasion of Iraq. Only the outer wall and its minaret remain. The tower was used for observation by U.S. troops during the war in Iraq. Unfortunately, in 2005, the minaret was partially destroyed during a bombing raid by insurgents. Here's a close-up of the tower before the destruction. Here you can see the scale with regards to people. The writing. Writing is a very important part of the Islamic world. Again, we're going to see a lot of versions of the Kufic script. We've seen it both with the Quran and with poetry. One of the reasons we have a lot of examples of writing from the Islamic world is because they're using paper. Paper comes from China. The rest of Western Europe at this time, they're using parchment. This comes from animals, specifically cows and sheep, and it takes a lot of time and money, energy, to raise these animals, to feed these animals, then slaughter the animals, prepare the skins. So therefore, parchment is very expensive. Paper, however, is very cheap. Cheap to make, it's easy to make, it's quick, and so we have a lot of paper and therefore a lot of books coming out of the Islamic world at a time in the Western world that books are both expensive and hard to come by. Speaking of, let's talk about some books. So this is Abu Zayed and Al-Harith questioning villagers. This is from a manuscript. We've got animals drinking from a pool. We've got a man spinning yarn there on the very far right. We've got images basically from kind of a village market here. So this is of Al-Hariri, which is a series of 50 tales of Abu Zayed, who was a wily old rogue. He was born in Basara in the modern-day Iraq into a wealthy family. He studied jurisprudence and became a government official, but is best known for Maqamat al-Hariri, the assemblies of al-Hariri. Consists of 50 anecdotes written in stylized prose, which was once memorized by heart by scholars. The Great Congregational Mosque, Isfahan. This is a 4-Iwan mosque. So what we're looking at is an Iwan. So this is the indentation surrounding a doorway. So we've got this indentation, typically surrounded by a pointed arch. So we've got a beautiful blue glazing on the tiles. This is coming from silica and metal oxides, which when heated to high temps in the kiln, create these glass-like surfaces. You have to imagine how beautiful these would be glinting in the sunlight in these desert areas. The main Iwan here is also the Qibla Iwan, so again, the area facing Mecca. And it is surrounded by 2 minarets. So the minarets have a purpose. The muezzin is the person who goes up into these tall minarets and sings the call to prayer. Remember, this is before clocks, this is before cell phones, alarms, so you need a way to let people know when it's time to come to the mosque or time for prayer. And so these muezzins would go up into these minarets and sing out these verses. Very similar to the purpose of the bell towers in the Christian tradition. Now we're in the Ilkshans. Ardashir captures Ardavan from Shahnameh. This is the Book of Kings by Ferdowsi. Ardashir is one of the first Sasanian Persian kings. He is in the blue robe riding a white horse. He has vanquished Ardawan, who is the king of the Parthians. They were the arch enemies. The executioner was riding behind him. The passage of power from one generation to the next is the central story here. So we have the power coming from Ardavan, the last of the Parthian kings, to Ardashir, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty. The story goes that when Ardavan hears of young Ardashir, who is said to be a raging lion in battle and gracious at banquets, the elderly king invites him to the royal court. One day, Ardashir's superior hunting skill so angers Ardavan that he banishes the handsome young youth to work in the stables. Even in this lowly position, Ardashir attracts the love of the beautiful slave girl Gulnar, who is trusted with the treasury of Artaban. Gulnar steals gold and jewels from the devoted king and flees with the charismatic Ardashir. Betrayed and humiliated, Artaban challenges Ardashir to battle. After 40 days of fighting, Artaban is taken prisoner. The gray-haired king, wounded and exhausted, is brought before the ambitious Ardashir and executed. The Registan, or Royal Square, Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Including in this is the Madrasa of Ulugh Beg. Madrasa is school. Timur, or Tamerlane, is one of the great leaders of the Timurids. This is in this era. Timur, or Tamerlane, was a descendant of Genghis Khan. So Timur's grandson, Ulugh Beg, founded quite numerous buildings, including an astronomical observatory, and one of the most important madrasa colleges in Uzbekistan. These are of the 4 style mosque. The Registan is actually the public square in between these buildings. This is where people would gather to hear royal proclamations, typically preceded by blasts of enormous copper pipes. This was also a place of public executions. Here's a close-up of the Madrasa of Ulugh Beg. You can see some of the decorative tiles there. This is the seduction of Yusuf from Sadi. The story we see here is actually detailed in both the Old Testament and the Quran. It's a story about Potiphar's wife, Zuleika, and Joseph. So Zuleika decorated 7 rooms in her palace with erotic paintings of Yusuf, or Joseph, making love to her. She leads him room by room, locking the doors behind them. By the time they arrive at the bedroom, she expects him to be aroused and throws herself at him. Suddenly, the doors fly open and he knows God is watching and he flees. One of the 114 surahs in the Quran is Surah Yusuf, named after the prophet Yusuf. It tells of the life of the prophet and is very similar to the story of Joseph in Genesis. Included in the surah is also the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Interestingly, in the Bible, she has no name. Also, in the biblical account, the wife shows great interest in Joseph, her husband's servant. Joseph rejects her. She takes revenge by accusing him falsely. In Persia, the story was retold in many different versions. This one, from Sadi, is from the 13th century. 2 centuries later, Sultan Ali al-Khatib puts it in writing with illustrations from the Persian artist Behzad. So in this version, we see Zuleika chasing Yusuf through the 7 rooms of her palace. In the last room, she tries to embrace him, but he manages to escape. Behzad is known as one of the best painters of Herat, a Persian city in what is now Afghanistan. He used paint, ink, and gold in this. Also, as part of this area on the Timurids, I want to talk about Sufism. This is from the Persian mystic Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi. Sufism unveils the true mystic levels of experiences encoded in everyday activities, incorporates ideas from Christian mysticism, Jewish Kabbalism, and shamanism, and they're most well known by or associated with the whirling dervish, of which there is a video on canvas. This is Bahram Gur in the Green Pavilion. So Bahram Gur is a very popular figure. Think of him like Hercules was in the Greco-Roman world. In this case, we see Bahram Gur surrounded by women of the court, surrounded then by beautiful architecture, and then from the beautiful grounds of the palace there, we've got trees and all sorts of animals and things all surrounding. It's very lavish. Now, Bahram Gur was a 14th century Sassanid king of Persia. Gur means wild ass. Here is another piece with part of a story about Bahram Gur and his girlfriend Azadeh. Bahram was a known hunter. He was well known for his hunting abilities. And we've got his girlfriend Azadeh, who was actually a harpist. So we actually see them in 2 scenes kind of here simultaneously. So we see them on the camel, and then we see her on the ground. The story goes that they were out hunting, and she was kind of making fun of his hunting abilities. So he says he can transform a male gazelle into female, and female by male, again, by just shooting a couple of arrows, and she does not believe him. This story comes from the Book of Kings by the poet Ferdazi. So he is able to transform the male gazelle into female by shooting the horns off, and the female into a male by shooting 2 arrows to create the horns. Now let's talk about the Safavid dynasty. This is the caravanserai. These are large buildings constructed by the Seljuks, and these are basically a wayside inn. So these would have been created about a day's journey from each other on these trade routes. They're also known as Hans in Turkey. The outer court is a stable for pack animals. They have a bath for travelers, a small mosque in which to pray, a kitchen to get food. They have areas that you can store your goods, because typically these would be travelers or merchants bringing lots of goods from the Far East into the West. So basically anything you needed were encompassed in these buildings. All right, so this is the shroud of Saint Josie. We have 2 elephants facing each other with griffins at their feet and the border with camels. Also, the script there says, "Glory and prosperity to the commander, Abu Mansur Bakhtinkin. My God prolong his existence." This rich silk Samite saddlecloth was woven in northeastern Iran sometime before 961, when Abu Mansur Bakhtin, the camel prince for whom it was woven, was beheaded. It was brought back from the First Crusade by Etienne de Blois and dedicated as a votive gift at the Abbey of St. Jos near Caen in Normandy. The prince, referred to in the woven Kufic script, is Bakhtin, active in the service of Abd al-Malik I, the Samanid Sultan of Khorasan. We've got the 2 elephants, as I said earlier. We have a thin border with geometric patterns, and we have parts of the Kufic script. It was used to wrap the bones of Saint Josie when he was reinterred in 1134. So here is a carpet, an Arabdil carpet. It's one of the world's oldest Islamic carpets, as well as one of the longest. It is 35 feet long. There are 25 million knots. There's 16 different pendants and 2 mosque lamps featured in it. The carpet takes its name from the town of Arabdil in northwest Iran. Arabdil was the home to the shrine of the Sufi saint Safi al-Din Ardabili, who died in 1334. He was a Sufi leader who trained his followers in Islamic mystic practices. After his death, his following grew and his descendants became increasingly powerful. In 1501, one of his descendants, Shah Ismail, seized power, united Iran, and established Shia Islam as the official religion. The dynasty he founded is now known as the Safavids. Their rule lasted until 1722. This carpet is one of a matching pair that was made for the shrine of Safi ad-Din Arabdili when it was enlarged in the late 1530s. The pile of the carpet is made from wool rather than silk because it holds the dye better. It includes a 4-line inscription at the end. It's a short poem, helps understand who commissioned the carpet. The first 3 lines of poetry read, translated of course, "Except for thy threshold, there is no refuge for me in all the world. Except for this door, there is no resting place for my head. The work of the slave of the portal, Maqsood Kushani." Maqsood was probably the court official charged with producing the carpets. By referring to himself as a slave, he may be presenting himself as a humble servant. The Persian word for door can be used to denote a shrine or royal court, so this inscription may imply that the royal court patronized his shrine. The carpets would have taken about 4 years to make. 4th line is also important. It provides the date of the carpet. 946. The Muslim calendar begins in the year 620 when Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina. This year is known as the year of the Hajj or flight. 946 is equivalent to 1539, the lunar Muslim calendar doesn't quite match the Gregorian calendar, so it could also be 1540. Here are some details from the carpet. Anatolia and the Ottoman Turks. So let's talk about Hagia Sophia. We are in Istanbul, Church of the Holy Wisdom. It is designed by Anthemus of Tralles, who was an expert on geometry and kinetics, study of motion, as well as Isidorus of Miletus, who was an expert on physics and vaulting techniques. The first church on this site was commissioned by Constantine, but was destroyed in 532 during riots that almost deposed Justinian. But he quickly rebuilt to show imperial authority. The original dome collapsed in 558 during an earthquake. A new, taller one was built by Isidorus' nephew. With the Turkish conquest in 1453, it became a mosque, and the 4 minarets were added, as well as a few buttresses and the large medallions. The mosaic decorations were whitewashed over in many cases. We have a dome as well as 2 half domes. The dome is 184 feet, 41 feet higher than the Pantheon. The dome seems to float because it rests on these closely spaced row of windows. And if the light is just right, it looks like the light is emanating from around the entire dome. It basically combines a basilica and central plan into one church. So it was built in a church in 537, converted to a mosque in 1453. It was opened as a museum in 1935 and just recently was converted back into a mosque. The first restoration of the Hagia Sophia was in 1847. Columns were straightened, dome and vaults were consolidated, old chandeliers were replaced by new ones, and the huge circular frame discs were hung. It took 800 workers 8 years to complete this restoration. Here are some details. You can see the medallions with the Kufic script added when it became a mosque. And you can see the minarets added to the exterior. All right, now let's go to the Mosque of Selim II in Turkey. This was designed by Sinan, one of the most famous architects in Islamic history. Built this imperial mosque for Sultan Selim II in 1568 to 74. There's a lead-covered dome that you can see here. 4 triple balconied minarets on the interior. We have 8 piers supporting a dome which is 197 feet high and 108 feet in diameter. You can see the beautiful design work on the interior. So the exterior, as you can see, we have the lead dome, so it's gray. We have white stone. It is very plain. And then you go inside and see all the beautiful colors, the reds and the blues, so vibrant. The whole complex is more than the length of 2 football fields, composed of a mosque, 2 madrasas, which serve as a college for studying hadith or traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. There were shops as well as a school for learning the recitation of the Quran located in the west. This is the illuminated tugra of Sultan Suleiman. So a tugra is something popular during the Ottoman time. It's a calligraphic emblem of the Sultan's authority that was included on all official documents, such as royal decrees, endowment papers, correspondence, and coins. It was used by the first Ottoman Sultan in 1324 and later developed into a more complex form that included 3 vertical shafts and 2 concentric oval loops on the left. It consists of the name of the reigning sultan, his father's name, his title, and the phrase, "the eternally victorious." This unique calligraphic emblem was not easily read or copied. Therefore, a specific court artist was designated to draw the undecorated standard tugra. A court illuminator assisted him in the exquisite decoration of the tugra on certain imperial documents. The illuminator's delicate scroll design and naturalistic flowers enhanced the harmonious lines of calligraphy, creating a colorful, voluminous effect. This includes his title, Khan, or Lord, motto, as well as the name of his father. By the way, Tugra, Tug means horse tail. This is the tiles from the Kiosk of Suleiman from the palace in Istanbul. So what you see here is the influence of Chinese art on the Ottomans. When the Ottomans defeated the Safavids, they returned home with a lot of stuff, including Chinese art. This included a type of ornament called a saz, S-A-Z, from a legendary enchanted forest, or hatayi from China, created by an artist from Tibrit named Shakulu, the head of the royal studio by the mid-16th century. So we see definitely the Chinese influence here, the blue and white painting, but you can also see the Persian influence as well. So we have cobalt and turquoise underglaze on a composite fruitware covered with a white slip. We are featuring birds, antelopes, lots of flowers and vegetation. There's the detail.